friends. I believe this is the first video I've ever made where I'm actually wearing something that I knitted. Most of the finished objects that I make for friends and family, and we're not always the same size. But today I've actually managed to make myself 2 finished objects, and one of them I'm gonna keep and one of them is going to be a Christmas present. And you know, when I started, I wasn't sure which was going to be which. So today is a tale of 2 Beanie number 6s. Beanies number 6, Beanies 12. Yeah, I know I already made this joke, but like, give it to me. It's funny. It's funny, right? Okay. So we're gonna talk about my review of the pattern. We're gonna talk about the different yarns I used for both versions. And we're gonna talk about which one I end up keeping. Yes, I know I'm coordinated. That doesn't necessarily mean this is the one I'm keeping. See what I mean? This one looks pretty good too, right? So which one is it gonna be? Let's get into it. So when I first saw the Beanie number 6 pattern by My Favorite Things Knitwear, I think I had the reaction that pretty much everyone on Ravelry did, which was, oh man, that's so cool. How did that shearling trim get like that? Oh, that's bouclé. Man, I really want to make that. And so it went into my queue. It wasn't until I went to San Francisco on my very long, somewhat ill-fated, very chaotic trip to GDC that I managed to find literally the yarn of my dreams. I had in my mind this vision of a yarn that I couldn't find anywhere. It was this amazing sort of eggy French vanilla bouclé that I thought would be perfect for the shearling, and I just couldn't find it anywhere until I went into Verb. This is quite literally the yarn of my dreams, and get that beautiful French vanilla bouclé that I'd been looking for the platonic ideal of the Beanie number 6 hat that was in my head. But before I found that yarn, I had went to another store and I found this beautiful squishy Lang Cashmere Light that I thought would make a fine substitute, since I had despaired of ever finding the actual bouclé that I wanted to use for the trim. And that's how I ended up with 2 different versions of the hat. So let's talk about both versions, and I hope it gives you some inspiration, particularly if, spoiler alert, like me, it turns out that you don't actually like working with bouclé that much. And I'll let you know whether I thought it was worth knitting twice. So the first more traditional version, traditional like this has been out forever and not less than a year. I got both types of yarn for this version of the hat from a Verb for Keeping Warm in Oakland, in the San Francisco area. They ship worldwide. Both of the yarns I used, actually, it turns out, are their house yarns. So the bouclé is a Verb for Keeping Warm lambkin, which I believe is alpaca and wool, predominantly alpaca. And it turned out absolutely beautifully. The top part is actually done in their other house brand of yarn, Bread and Butter. This is in Bun, which I believe is bulky, and it has such beautiful stitch definition. I don't do a lot of cabling. I don't, you know, please be kind about my I-cords, you guys. I've had a hell of a day. But I don't do cabling. I don't do a lot of fancy stuff, but even with simple stockinette, I was really, really impressed by the stitch definition I got out of Bun. I actually really want to place an online order and get a sweater quantity of Bun in their Coastal Redwood colorway in order to make myself a Winter League pullover from Alexandra Tavel, also known as Two of Wands. I made one for my husband for Christmas and he absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it when I tried it on. I think that color would look good on me. Yeah, I just really fell in love with this top yarn when I was making this, and I wish I could say the same about the bouclé. I really fell in love with the texture that it gave me. I really fell in love with the fabric. But God, you guys, if you've never knit with bouclé, maybe keep it that way, unless you really, really want that finished object. I've never had a more maddening experience working with the yarn in my life, and since then, I've watched some other knit tubers working on things that also require bouclé, and it seems like it's probably par for the course. Your needles just get snagged in all the little loops. It's hard to tell what's a loop on your needle that's supposed to be there and what is you accidentally having slipped another loop from the bouclé onto the fabric or onto the needle. It was a nightmare. It hurt my hands, and my hands never hurt when I knit. And it was just awful. It took me so much longer than knitting that amount of fabric has ever taken me in my whole life, including when I very first started, in order to get that done. And I'm really happy with the finished product. And what I will say actually is, and we'll get into comparing the two hats directly in a moment, but sewing together, like basically what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to sew, double fold this. Well, My Favorite Things Knitwear calls for you to actually do triple the length and then do a double fold, which felt like a bit much, particularly because I hated working with this bouclé yarn. So I got it to what felt like a good double, and then I just folded it in slightly and sewed it, which she does want you to eventually sew it all in. And I feel like, particularly with how thick this bouclé is, it works just fine. This is a very, very warm hat, and I'm really impressed with it. I had trouble with both versions of the hat when it came to picking up the stitches in the purl ridge in order to in order to knit the I-cord. So what I ended up doing was making the I-cords separately and then sewing them on, which I realize is a huge pain in the butt, but you have to understand, this is maybe the nicest thing I've ever made. Like there's so many issues with it. Like you can see the top is like weird and pointy, the I-cords aren't going on correctly, but overall, particularly from a distance, this is the single most impressive thing I've ever made. This is it's just cool, you guys. It's just cool. And I was really feeling that before I got to the I-cord trim. And I was so terrified of screwing this up that I was just like, you know what? I know how to make I-cord. I know I can sew it on. Let me do this in a way that isn't going to screw up the whole hat. And I stand by that. You know, I don't want, you know, I don't think it's a great idea to look inside, right? But I think it turned out so well. And I'm really, really pleased with this. It's so warm and it looks so cool. It looks exactly like I wanted it to look in my head. And that's never really happened for me before on a finished object. So I'm really, really pleased with that. Let's talk about the pattern a little bit actually before we get into talking about the specific hats. So I'm very much a beginner knitter. I've knit a lot of finished objects, I guess, but I haven't knit most of them well. I get easily intimidated by things like lace and cables. If I could spend my whole life just doing stockinette in the round, I'd be a very happy person. I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, ambitious. This was a really good project for me because it was just fiddly enough, particularly on the first version of the hat with the bouclé, which was a real struggle. If I had to do something that was complicated with that bouclé, I probably would have just given up entirely. But I think I wouldn't call this like a good first project for anyone, certainly, between the bouclé and the I-cords and the decreases. But if you're sort of an ambitious beginner like me, I've been doing this, I think, just about a year now. I found the whole process and the pattern and the way it was written to be very, very friendly for my tastes. So I really, really enjoyed the process. I did modify it a bit, sort of using my own judgment. For the first hat, I think I mentioned this in a previous video, I accidentally started doing the bouclé in garter stitch in the round as opposed to in stockinette, and I think it turned out great. I have no regrets there, actually. I ended up shortening the brim on both of those, doing a double fold instead of a triple fold, and I think it turned out really well. I think it's a great pattern that really can be tailored to your level of ambition, which I really appreciate. So yeah, let's talk about the hats. So yeah, I guess the one thing I would say actually about both versions of this hat And this may 100% be a me problem because, as you might remember, I don't swatch. Both hats are a lot tighter than I thought they would be. I knit the largest size for both versions, and this one is pretty snug. It fits me very tightly around the ears. The other one I had to stretch out a little bit on a balloon, but we'll get to that. I don't really have any negatives about the finished object. I really enjoy it. Like I said, the only part that I found a little too challenging for me as a beginner was picking up the stitches for the I-cord. I really struggled with that. But like I said, making a separate I-cord and then sewing it on worked out really well for me. I used a much smaller and sturdier yarn for that than I did. I didn't want to use the super bulky bouclé or the bulky bun. In order to do that, I grabbed some charcoal gray DK weight, which, you know, doesn't match super well, but thanks to the bouclé, you know, that hides a multitude of sins. So I think it worked out pretty well regardless. So this is the ridiculous stash busting camel silk and cashmere version of the Beanie No. 6. What I did was, and I use the term stash busting lightly, right? Because the majority of this hat is cashmere, which I had to purchase. So the white trim and the I-cord is all Lang Cashmere Light, and I held that double. And then the actual cap portion of the hat, I had some undyed Camel Silk that I actually ended up holding quadruple because it was fingering weight. And basically how I did that was that I caked up 2 skeins of the undyed Camel Silk, and then I just grabbed both ends from both skeins. And that actually worked a lot better than I thought it would, if I'm perfectly honest. I thought that was going to end up being a huge tangled mess for me. It's been a very long time since I've held anything together, and I've certainly, I don't think, ever held 4 strands together. And I've definitely never worked from both sides of a cake, but it worked out pretty well, honestly. I think the stitch definition that I got was great. The one thing that I would do differently, and I think this is something to keep in mind if you ever decide to use this yarn or a similar yarn. So the Cashmere Light from Lang is a very lofty yarn, right? And one of the reasons, sorry if this is getting blown out, you can see there's almost like a kinky, crinkly texture that I thought would be nice for sort of mimicking, well, referencing the bouclé without actually being bouclé, which is one of the reasons I thought it would be a good substitute. And I held it double because you were supposed to be using a super bulky yarn. So here's where I screwed up, and I think a more experienced knitter would have noticed this right away. But it wasn't until I was about halfway through the brim that sort of the light bulb went off for me. And I don't think, honestly, I would have realized it at all if I hadn't made the bouclé version first. So it seems to me that the way that My Favorite Things Knitwear was getting a lot of the floofiness and the shearling look out of the bouclé was by having it knit at a really tight gauge in order to make this look almost like fleece and not like a knitted fabric. And that totally makes sense for a bouclé that has all of these loops coming out of it. But the cashmere yarn that I'm using gets its floof not from all of those loops or anything like that, but just from a certain loftiness that the yarn has. So when I held it double and I used the same needle size, I actually ended up compressing the yarn a lot and making it look much more like a traditional knitted fabric than giving it the space to really go full floof. If I were to do this over again, I would not hold the cashmere double. My gut, my heart of hearts, my cashmere heart of hearts is telling me that I would have gotten as good or better a result holding just the bulky yarn single on that weight of needles, because it would have given the yarn the space to really floof out. So you live, you learn. I think that's the first thing that I really noticed about this version. It's funny because comparing the two, I would say the bouclé version is what I would wear if I were going to the Arctic Circle in winter and I wanted to be super warm. And this version is the version I would be wearing between the Uber and the 5-star hotel in Switzerland when I was on my way to meet friends for some après ski, even though I don't ski. at all. So those are sort of the different vibes. This is definitely a lot lighter of a hat, even with the cashmere held double and then the double fold. But I think it's really lovely, and I'm so glad that I did the I-cord in the cashmere as well. By then I realized what was going on with the cashmere, and I did hold the yarn single for that, as opposed to holding it double. And I think it turned out really well. The one thing I would say though is that as much as the bouclé hides sins, these yarns don't. So full disclosure, while I'm definitely showing this off like a finished object, it's not quite finished. I haven't sewn the brim where it needs to go. And like I said, I splashed a little bit of protein shake on it when I had a massive spill this morning, so I have to rewash it. Those are the main issues I have. Please be gentle with me. I will say that the cashmere hides a lot less than the bouclé does, so I am finding it to be more of a challenge to sew it, which is one of the reasons I'm sort of delaying. I don't think the I-cords turned out quite as well. They're a little bit more wiggly, but I'm really, really happy with this version of the hat. And honestly, I think this might be the one that I keep. And the main reason is because I think it looks wonkier. I'm happy with the fact that I made this. I like the color scheme. I mean, it goes with what I'm wearing, although I probably wouldn't be wearing a short sleeve ringer tee in winter. But I'm really happy with it. And if I keep it for myself, maybe I won't have to sew the brim, because I know what's in there and I'll be able to sort of deal with it myself. That seems like a really funny reason to keep a hat, but here we are. So probably the more traditional beanie number 6 with the bouclé, that's probably going to be a Christmas present for somebody. But I'm so happy that I did both versions, and I'm so happy that I started with the bouclé, because the bouclé was way, way harder, and I don't think I would have stuck through it if I had done that one second. You know, it's funny because I have 2 kids, so I spend a lot of time doing the same pattern twice with different yarn and slight tweaks and that kind of thing, and which I'll probably talk about in a later video. And I really enjoy doing things that way because it allows me to feel like I'm gaining a certain level of confidence and competence in the techniques every time that I do something. And I'm so glad that I made both of these. And I hope it really encourages you to experiment with the kinds of yarn that a pattern calls for, because while the bouclé shearling trick is really, really cool, I really, really like the way that the cashmere turned out. Even though it looks nothing like shearling, I think it sort of references it in a cute, fun, light way and looks really put together in a way a lot of the hats I've made in the past haven't really. I hope it gave you a sense of some of the pitfalls and triumphs that will come along with making your very own beanie number 6. And I hope you have an easier time with the bouclé than I do, or if you choose not to use it, that you love your finished object anyway. All right, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe. If you didn't like it, who knows, maybe it'll get better. Maybe you should like, comment, and subscribe anyway. Just kidding. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.